A man is bent backward over the ropes, another man's fist buried in his ribs, and instead of falling, he stays up. Look closer at the sketch and you'll notice something strange. The men holding him up, the ones bracing his shoulders and gripping his arms so he doesn't hit the canvas, all have his own face. That is not an accident of drawing. That is the entire argument of this video. Nobody arrives to catch you when you're being hit. You catch yourself. The version of you who trained on mornings nobody watched, the version who kept a promise to himself when breaking it would have been easier, those are the hands under your arms right now. Luck was never in the frame. This is the core promise of what you're about to hear, so let's not bury it under filler. Belief in yourself is not a mood, a slogan, or a trait some people are born with. It is a mechanism, a measurable, trainable process that decides whether you read a setback as information or as a verdict. People who believe in themselves are not immune to bad outcomes. They are immune to a specific internal collapse that happens when bad outcomes get misread as proof that effort doesn't matter. Luck is the story losers and winners both tell after the fact, for different reasons, and by the end of this you'll be able to spot that story every time, including when you tell it to yourself. Start with locus of control. In the late 1960s, psychologist Julian Rotter proposed that people explain outcomes along a spectrum. Someone with an external locus believes outcomes are driven by luck, fate, or circumstance. Someone with an internal locus believes outcomes are driven by their own decisions and effort. Decades of research tied internal locus of control to higher achievement, better health, and faster recovery after failure, not because these people are more talented, but because when something goes wrong they ask, "What can I change?" While externally oriented people ask, "Why did this happen to me?" And only one of those questions has an actionable answer, and the other one just keeps you waiting. Here's the part rarely explained properly. Locus of control isn't fixed. It's a habit of interpretation, built sentence by sentence in the private language you use with yourself after something breaks. Every time you say, "I got unlucky," when you actually skip preparation, you rehearse the external habit. Every time you say, "I could have prepared better," you rehearse the internal one. You are, right now, in an ongoing training session for how your own brain explains your life to you. Most people never notice they're in the gym. This connects to a discovery that reshaped clinical psychology in the 1970s. Psychologist Martin Seligman exposed animals to a shock they couldn't escape. Later, placed somewhere escape was easy, a simple jump over a low barrier. Most didn't try. They endured the shock, even though freedom was one movement away. Seligman called this learned helplessness, the belief, formed through repeated failure, that your actions don't affect outcomes, a belief that then gets wrongly applied to situations where your actions absolutely would work. In humans, this rarely looks like lying on the floor. It looks like not applying for the next job because the last 3 didn't work out, or calling yourself unlucky in love or money because one specific attempt failed and you widen the lesson into an identity. Seligman later found the same mechanism runs in reverse. Learned optimism, where explaining setbacks as specific and changeable produces faster recovery and better performance than raw talent alone. "I underprepared for their budget constraints" is a correction. "I'm bad at negotiating" is a cage you built and locked yourself inside. This is where self-efficacy enters, a term from psychologist Albert Bandura, describing your specific estimate of whether you can execute the actions a particular goal requires. Unlike generic self-esteem, self-efficacy is narrow and useful. Can I actually do this exact thing? Bandura found this belief, independent of raw skill, changes how much effort you invest, how long you persist, and how you respond to failure. 2 people with identical ability but different self-efficacy produce different results, because the one who believes execution is possible stays in the uncomfortable room longer and treats a stumble as data, not a verdict. Bandura identified 4 builders of self-efficacy: direct mastery experience, actually doing the hard thing and succeeding in small versions of it, watching someone similar to you succeed; credible persuasion, which works far less than assumed without real evidence behind it, and how you interpret your own nervous system, whether racing nerves get labeled as fear or as readiness. That's the machinery behind every "believe in yourself" poster you've rolled your eyes at. The poster was vague, generic, and easy to dismiss. The mechanism underneath it isn't. It's specific, buildable, and it's been running your outcomes the whole time whether you noticed it or not. Now the actual subject, luck. It's real in the narrow sense that unpredictable variance exists everywhere. Pretending otherwise is its own delusion. But the popular use of the word isn't describing variance. It's describing survivorship bias. During World War II, researchers studied bullet holes on planes that returned from combat, planning to reinforce the areas hit most. Statistician Abraham Wald pointed out the flaw: those planes survived being hit in those spots. The planes hit in the engine or fuel line never made it back to be examined. The real vulnerability was everywhere the survivors weren't hit, because getting hit there meant you didn't survive to be counted. Apply that to success. When you see someone who got lucky, you're looking at a survivor, not the 1,000 attempts using a nearly identical strategy that failed silently, off camera. Luck, in the popular sense, is what an outsider calls the visible tip of an invisible pyramid of attempts, most of which never got counted because they didn't survive to be written about. The founder ran enough experiments and absorbed enough failed launches that eventually one intersected with the right conditions, and stripped of the invisible failure it looks instantaneous. Calling it luck is a psychologically comfortable lie, because if it was luck, you never have to examine why you stopped at attempt 3 instead of attempt 30. There's a colder reason people reach for the word. Psychologist Bernard Wiener found a consistent asymmetry. We attribute our own success to skill and effort, our own failure to bad luck. But judging others, the pattern flips. Their success gets called luck, their failure gets called character. This self-serving bias explains the reflexive urge to explain away someone else's success, because crediting their internal qualities would force an uncomfortable comparison to your own. Calling someone else's success luck is often less about them and more about protecting your own self-image from the fact that they simply did something you haven't done yet. It's a quiet form of self-protection that costs nothing in the moment and everything over time, because it keeps you from ever asking the one question that would actually help: what did they do differently, and when did I stop doing it? Ancient philosophy reached the same conclusion with better precision 19 centuries earlier. The Stoic Epictetus, who began life enslaved and became one of Rome's most influential teachers, built his philosophy around one distinction: some things are up to us, and some are not. Our judgments, effort, and responses, up to us. Other people's opinions and the outcome of events once we've done our part, not up to us. Nearly all suffering, he argued, comes from confusing the two categories. The genius of the framing is that it doesn't ask you to control the outcome. It asks you to fully own the input and release the rest, which sounds like resignation but is the opposite. It's what allows total effort without the paralysis of fearing failure, because your job was never to guarantee the result. Your job was to execute your part completely. There's a companion idea in Taoist philosophy that adds a layer the Stoics leave underdeveloped: Wu Wei, often translated as non-action, though that misleads more than it clarifies. Wu Wei means action so aligned with the actual shape of a situation that it requires no force against it. Water doesn't fight the rock, it moves around it, and given enough time, wears it down. Belief without responsiveness becomes stubbornness. A person who believes in themselves but refuses to read the terrain in front of them, refuses to adjust strategy, refuses to notice when a door has genuinely closed and another opened, isn't practicing self-belief. They're practicing ego preservation disguised as conviction. The oak breaks in the storm because it insists on staying rigid. The reed bends and is still standing the next morning. Confidence in yourself was never supposed to mean confidence in one fixed plan. It means confidence in your ability to keep making good decisions as the terrain shifts. There's a mechanism that ties belief directly to outcome in a way that should unsettle you slightly. In 1968, researchers Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson told teachers that certain randomly selected students had tested as growth spurters, about to show unusual improvement. There was no test, the names were random. By year's end, those students showed significantly greater gains than their peers, because the teachers unconsciously gave them more attention and patience based purely on a planted expectation. This is the Pygmalion effect, and while the original study measured how others' expectations shape you, the same mechanism runs internally. How many times you try before quitting, how you interpret a stranger's neutral expression, whether you send the email or delete the draft, all shaped by an expectation about yourself you may never have consciously chosen, inherited from a bad year. An offhand comment from someone whose opinion shouldn't have mattered, or a single failure you never re-examined. But be precise here, because there's a trap hiding just beneath all of this. Believing in yourself is not believing you control everything. Confusing the two produces what psychologist Ellen Langer called the illusion of control. People consistently overestimate their influence over outcomes actually governed by chance. In Langer's classic experiment, people who chose their own lottery numbers valued the ticket far higher than people handed a random one, even though the odds were identical. The choosing felt like control. It wasn't. That's the gambler doubling down because the next hand feels right, the trader ignoring a stop-loss because this trade feels different. Real self-belief and the illusion of control look identical from outside and are opposites underneath. One is confidence in your process. The other is superstition wearing confidence's clothes. If you need to lie to yourself about the variance to keep believing in yourself, what you have isn't self-belief. It's denial with better branding, and it collapses the first time reality asks it a hard question. So what is self-belief, functionally day to day? A compounding identity-based habit. Research on habit formation converges on a finding that matters more than any productivity trick. Durable change doesn't come from wanting a different outcome, it comes from adopting a different identity and acting in ways consistent with it. I'm trying to wake up earlier. Negotiates with a temporary goal. I'm the kind of person who protects my mornings. Defends an identity, and identities are defended far more fiercely than goals, because abandoning the behavior now means contradicting who you believe you are. Every small action casts a vote for one identity or the other, and the totals accumulate silently until the identity is simply true, built entirely out of evidence you generated yourself. This is why the myth of luck is so corrosive. It removes you from the vote-casting process entirely. If success is luck, there's no action to repeat, no identity to build. You're just waiting for weather to change, and people who wait for weather do not get more storms of good fortune than people who build shelter. They just get colder, for longer, blaming the sky. There's a cost to blaming the sky with a name, cognitive dissonance, described by psychologist Leon Festinger. When belief and reality conflict, believing you deserve success while failing to produce it through effort, the mind resolves the discomfort one of two ways: change the behavior, or change the belief to avoid admitting the behavior needs to change. Blaming luck is the second path, cheaper in the moment and far more expensive over a lifetime, because it never requires the adjustment, and the gap between where you are and where you want to be never closes. Every time you resolve the discomfort of a setback by saying, "That's just how it goes," instead of, "Here's what I'm changing," you take the cheaper exit, and the debt doesn't disappear. It becomes due again next time, with interest, wearing a different outfit. None of this means effort guarantees a timeline. Preparation meeting opportunity is still partly about opportunity. Timing you don't control. But here's the distinction that matters: people who look lucky, in hindsight, were positioned to catch the opportunity because they'd already built the skill or readiness before it arrived, often through years where nothing seemed to pay off. Luck isn't the opposite of preparation. It's raw material only preparation can convert into anything usable. The same stroke of timing turns into a breakthrough for a prepared person and an unremarkable non-event for someone standing in the same spot without the skill to use it. Discipline enters here too, because discipline is often misdescribed as willpower, and willpower is a shallow, depletable resource that fails exactly when you need it, under stress, late in a hard day. Discipline that holds up over years is built from the identity mechanism above. A person with evidence that their effort produces results doesn't need as much willpower, because the behavior has become self-reinforcing. Belief is the fuel that makes discipline cheap to sustain, and discipline is the mechanism that manufactures the evidence belief is built from. They're the same feedback loop viewed from two angles, and trying to build one without the other is why. Just be more disciplined. Collapses within weeks. There's no belief underneath to make the cost feel worth it. Consider how this plays out with something almost every viewer of this video has directly experienced. Two people who both lose a job, both fail an exam, both watch a venture collapse. Identical event. Radically different 6 months later. The variable was never the event. It was the explanatory style each person applied to it in the hours immediately after, whether the story told was, "This happened because of something stable and permanent about me," or, "This happened because of something specific and changeable, and here's what I'm adjusting." That single narrative choice, repeated until automatic, does more work in determining your next 6 months than almost any external factor you could name, including the original event itself. Apply this to money specifically, because wealth is where the luck narrative does the most damage in both directions. People who never build wealth often explain the gap by calling it inheritance or timing, sometimes true, often a convenient way to avoid examining their own saving rate or spending patterns. People who do build wealth often credit it entirely to their own genius, ignoring the market conditions or timing that played a real role, which is exactly what causes overconfidence and reckless risk later. The healthiest financial psychology sits between both distortions: full ownership of what you control, spending discipline, the gap between income and expenses, consistent investing regardless of mood, combined with a clear-eyed acknowledgement that markets and timing will always carry a portion of the outcome that isn't yours to claim. Name the luck honestly so it doesn't need to be denied, then put your full effort into the enormous portion that was never luck at all: the temperament, the consistency, the years of unglamorous reinvestment that compounding quietly turns into a result nobody sees coming until it's already arrived. Return to the image this opened with: the fighter kept upright by figures who share his own face. The obvious reading: be your own support system. The reading that's easy to miss: those figures aren't identical. They're positioned at different points, doing different jobs. One braces the shoulder taking the impact, one holds from beneath to keep the structure from folding. That's not one version of you showing up 3 times. That's the version who trained absorbing the technical hit, and the version who has failed before and survived it guaranteeing you won't hit the floor, because he's already been on the floor and knows exactly how to make sure this time is different. Self-belief was never one feeling you either have or don't. It's a small crowd of former versions of you, each built in a different season of discipline, each holding up a different part of the load. You don't build that crowd by declaring belief once in a moment of inspiration. You build it the way every one of those figures got built: one round survived, one morning shown up to, one setback correctly explained instead of blamed on the sky. And the next time you're bent backward over the ropes with the wind knocked out of you, look for the hands. They were never going to belong to anyone else. They were always going to be yours, built in advance, in rounds you already survived without knowing they were training you for this exact one. Luck will still walk through the room sometimes. Nobody sane denies that timing and circumstance carry real weight. But luck is not a strategy, and it is not a floor. It cannot be trained, repeated, or relied upon, and building your identity around it means building your identity around something you have no relationship with. Belief in yourself, understood properly, as locus of control, as self-efficacy, as identity reinforced through repeated evidence, as the discipline to keep your grip only on what's actually yours, is the only floor that's ever been under anyone who stayed standing. Every fighter in that sketch has been hit before. That's exactly why he's still on his feet. If this changed how you think about the next hard round you're walking into, subscribe to Apex Motivation so the next one finds you. Hit like if this gave you something worth carrying into tomorrow, and share it with the one person you know who's been calling their own hard work bad luck for far too long.